Bienvenidos a Conversaciones con la Biblioteca Digital Pitts. Les habla Deborenit Ortiz Rivera, bibliotecaria de la Biblioteca Digital Pitts. En este espacio dialogamos sobre temas vinculados con la alfabetización académica, teológica, digital y cultural en la educación ministerial y teológica. También lo utilizamos para presentarles a los teólogos y las teólogas cuyos trabajos están incluidos en nuestro catálogo digital. Esta temporada conversamos sobre el tema entre la historia y el testimonio. Este episodio está titulado El estudio de la historia y el testimonio. Por lo general, los cursos de historia son relegados a la transmisión de datos y fechas, dejando poco espacio para la reflexión crítica. En este episodio conversaremos sobre su aporte a la formación de ministros y ministras bien versados en el contexto de sus comunidades. Para ello, hemos invitado a nuestra colaboradora, la doctora Marta Luna, gerente de comunidades de la Asociación para la Educación Teológica Hispana, y a la doctora Ondina González. La doctora González dirige el Centro de Recursos Justo Catherine González, el cual está adscrito a AEF. Pero además es una historiadora que fue profesora a nivel universitario. También ha colaborado en proyectos sobre la historia del cristianismo en Latinoamérica. Su libro, Nuestra Fe, está disponible en la biblioteca. Mientras escuchamos esta conversación, les invitamos a que reflexionen sobre las siguientes preguntas. ¿Qué factores tomamos en cuenta cuando planificamos un curso de historia? ¿Cómo nos aseguramos de que contribuya a la formación espiritual de nuestros estudiantes? ¿Qué debemos hacer para resaltar el aporte de la identidad cultural a la formación ministerial?
Good morning. I want to welcome this morning Dr. Ondina González. She is an author. She is a professor of history, Christian history. She has written and co-authored with famous names. One of them, my boss, Dr. Justo Luis González. And we are glad to welcome her this morning. We are going to talk about the study of history and the testimony. Good morning, Dr. González.
Good morning, and please do call me Ondina. It's a pleasure to be here and to have this opportunity to share a little bit of my experience.
It is an honor for us too. So let's go ahead and start the conversation. This is going to be a very pleasant conversation, and I know I'm looking forward to it. The first question I have is, to begin this conversation about history, about the testimony, tell us a little bit about your interest in studying history and your experience with academia.
I think my study of history was preordained. My father was an Old Testament scholar who taught Bible classes, but he always considered himself a historian. He taught at a small college, and he loved to share stories, history, with us. From the time that my brothers and I were tiny, we were listening to stories. Generally from the Bible, but they were stories nonetheless. So I think it was in my blood. My uncle, to whom you referred earlier, Justo González, is also a historian. Excuse me. So I think it was preordained. But I also believe very firmly that every single one of us stands on the shoulders of those who have gone before. And if we do not appreciate their stories, if we don't know their stories, we cannot keep those memories alive. We can't share them. We can't learn from them. So I think it's very important that we all know not only our own personal history, but the history of our community, the history of the world, to learn how things are put together, how society is put together, how thoughts have evolved, conflicts have been resolved or caused. So I think history lays the foundation for how we move today. Now, that's from the perspective of a historian. I suspect a mathematician would tell you something different. But from the perspective of a historian, for me, it lays the foundation. My experience in the academy is the experience of a minority woman, of a Latina, in a world that is dominated by men and non-minority men. So my experience of academia has been filtered through that, through my reality. But for me, it was also a very exciting place to be because of the knowledge and the conversations and the opportunity to interact with students, which can be equally frustrating and amazing. Growing process and a frightening process. So, excuse me, so it's not a bad choice. You just have to be ready to work hard.
So you mentioned that you were a minority, that you were female in this realm, a brand new realm for you. So what were some of the challenges, and what are still some challenges that teachers must overcome when teaching history?
I think there's some challenges that every teacher faces, no matter who that teacher is. One of the things that shocked me was the disparity of knowledge among the students. And if you don't take that into consideration, you will fail your students. I want to share a story. I'm a historian and I believe in stories, so I want to share a story to illustrate that point. The first time I ever taught a Western Civ class, I started talking about the Age of Expansion, which is when the Europeans began moving out and sailing everywhere and colonizing. And I mentioned something about Asia. And a student raised her hand and said to me, "Where is Asia?" And I said, I had a map, this back in the days when you actually had overhead projectors and stuff like that. And I said, "It's this really, really big part over here," as I tapped the map of the world. Marta, I learned more about teaching from her than she ever learned about history from me. Because the next class period, I came in with even bigger maps of the world. And I started explaining where different places were and laying the geography of the world out for this class. Yeah. Now, she may have been the only one in the class that didn't know where Asia was. But it was a very important lesson for me. If you do not realize that your students come from different backgrounds, different knowledge levels, you cannot be effective. So I think that that's true. I think another challenge that we face as teachers is to recognize our own preconceptions. If I walk into a classroom and I think women are not as smart as men, that's a terrible preconception to walk in there with. If I walk in and I think Latinos and Latinas are all lazy and they're not going to do the work, that's a terrible preconception, and that gets in the way of my teaching. It gets in the way of reaching the students. And if we don't recognize our own preconceptions, our own prejudices that we take into the classroom, we fail, I think. And I'll share another story with you. There was a pastor here in Atlanta who was using one of Justo's textbooks for the Bible Institute that he ran in his little church. And he knocked on Justo's door one day and said, "Are you the Justo González who wrote this book?" And yes, indeed. And Jose came in and they had a grand old time visiting. The book that Jose was using in his Bible Institute, in his class, was a book that had been used by seminaries, but seminaries had largely dropped it because it was too difficult for their students.
Oh.
So the moment we decide this person who doesn't have an advanced degree, who doesn't have all these college credits, cannot understand something complicated, we have failed. So it's those kinds of preconceptions that we have to be aware of. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face.
So as I'm hearing your stories, I love stories. I'm sorry. I enjoy stories and I go with the flow. As I'm hearing your stories, I hear and I sense that it was a transformative journey for you too, as you were going through all of those stages in your journey. And the challenges, the students, the trying to help them translate all this information that you're giving them so that they can apprehend it, they can make their own, they can use it, they can be practitioners. What elements then should be taken into account when selecting a textbook, like you were mentioning before, selecting a textbook or selecting resources for a history course? And it struck me the story that the seminary rejected a certain book, thinking that it was too difficult for the students to understand.
Well, first of all, if we do not challenge our students, we do not respect them. Mm. It is important to believe that there is growth, that growth is possible. And if it's one of those preconceptions, if we go in there saying, oh, these are just a bunch of students who can't understand anything complicated, yet again, we are setting up barriers to learning. It's not coming from the students, it's coming from the professor. And when you choose textbooks, you have to have the same idea. A lot of the choice of textbooks depends upon the purpose of the particular course.
Yes.
If it is an introductory course, then it's important to choose a textbook that covers a broad variety of topics.
Yes.
Perhaps rather shallowly, but you still need to just give a little taste of these different topics to the students. My experience with teaching survey courses and using those kinds of introductory textbooks is that I spent more time trying to decide what not to teach, because there is so much information that it is difficult to process. So I think that there has to be a selection that goes on when you're teaching those types of courses and when you look at the textbooks as well. The other thing I think that is critical is students have to hear themselves in what they read, in what they hear. I am a professor that doesn't believe in dates. I think history classes, which are just a series of dates and the names of kings and what is called great man's history, is a sure way to lose your students out of the gate. There are certain dates that are essential, and you have to know sequence of events. You can't put the US Civil War before you put World War I. I mean, they're just things you have to know. But if we ask our students simply to learn a bunch of dates and a bunch of names, there's no way for them to connect. There's no hook for them. And I think that's where the stories are important. That when we tell stories, they can see themselves in that particular event. They can see themselves in that experience. I am by training and inclination a social historian, which means that I look at society. I don't study wars. I don't study monarchy or material culture or anything like that. I study society and how society functions, and particularly women within the colonial world. That is my area of study, my area of interest. And I think it's really important that students hear themselves. Because when I was in college, Latin women, they exist. I never heard myself. And that is empowering when you can hear yourself. So as you choose the materials, keep that in mind. They have to be able to hear themselves, but they've got to hear other voices as well. If our students leave our classes believing that my perspective is the only one that's out there, we have again failed them. So choose resources that amplify their understanding of the world. I got to tell you another story. The first time I taught colonial Latin American history, I taught a class that had a young woman in there, really nice young woman. Nobody in there knew anything about Latin America to begin with, much less the colonial period. But I always start those courses by talking about the extraordinary civilizations that were in Latin America before the arrival of the Europeans. And I was talking about the Aztec civilization this particular day, and we were talking, well, doing whatever it is that I did with the Aztecs. And class is over. This young woman goes about her life. She comes back to the next class, and she said to me, after thinking about what we had talked about, she said, "You mean those people that I see who work in the grocery store who are from Mexico have that history, have that culture, that civilization in their history?" She said, "I never knew." And I think what it did for her was to make her appreciate folks differently. So I think it's important that we introduce our students to other voices as well. It's a very long answer to your question.
Oh, no, but it made the point. And it is important because for example, I can hear that voice in your book, Nuestra Fe. I can hear your voice and I hear that expression of diversity, of evolution, how our history moves, the contextualization of it. I can hear the marginalized voices in those books. I can also hear how history continues, the continuity of it. And I can also see through your testimony now, global impact. It just didn't stay contained to the Aztecs, and now we're hearing about it and we're understanding it and we're learning from it. So yes, I think it's a beautiful thing. It's amazing. It's transformative.
I think so.
It's transformative. So that leads us then to a following question. We're talking about resources. So specifically regarding the use of resources, tell us a little about the Justo and Catherine González Resource Center. I know that is near and dear to your heart. Two wonderful, wonderful historians, people that we love. So tell us a little bit about the center.
Okay. The Justo Catherine González Resource Center is part of the Asociación para la Educación Teológica Hispana. It's one of the programs that ATH sponsors. We're located in Decatur, Georgia, which is basically a suburb of Atlanta. There we house a collection of all of Justo's published works, including those he's done by himself, as well as those he's done with Dr. Catherine González, who is his wife, as well as those he's done with other individuals. And then we also have a collection of the magazines where he's written articles or anything in which he's published something. We have the physical collection there at the center. But more important, and I think particularly for students, is the digital collection that we are amassing of his unpublished works. Those include sermons, Bible studies, lectures, anything of that nature that he gave that was not written for publication. We have the text for, because he writes down every single thing he says. So we have all of that text, and we are uploading each of those documents into the database so that people around the world can have access to them. The center is a way that not only Justo and Catherine's legacy can be preserved and shared, but I also, not only for the Latin community, I think it is for the church writ large. So as you and I both know, we have a lot to offer the church. The Latinos, Latinas, and everything in between, we have a lot to offer the church, not just ourselves. And part of what the center does is it makes that outward spread of at least one particular theologian's perspective, but which seems to echo a whole lot of everybody else's perspective. We have that also available for the church at large. And I think that that's important because as minorities, we often have to claim our seat at the table. We're not invited, we claim it because that seat was prepared for us by God.
Amen.
And we claim that seat. We are, sorry, I'm going to start preaching. We are children of God. We claim that seat. And this is one way that we can do that. Making Justo's resources available is one way that we can claim that seat. Because he's always had this amazing ability to write in a way that people from all perspectives can hear. I don't care if you come out of a Pentecostal, evangelical, very conservative theological perspective, or you come out from a super progressive, super left-leaning social justice perspective. He speaks to us all. And I think that that is unusual. And I think that's another reason why it's important to make these materials available. In addition to the fact that just like Jose's students could understand and grow from a textbook that seminaries deemed too difficult, that young woman teaching in her storefront church in Venezuela should have access to the best resources available. And I think that Justo's resources fall into that category. So she should be able to go online and read a Bible study he's written, read a lecture that he gave, hear a sermon that he preached, not only for her own personal growth, but so that she can bring that to her Sunday school class. So I think the work of the center is really, really important. And you're right, it is close to my heart.
I know. It is close. I mean, if you're part of it, if you're a member of it, and even for those outside of the IF, it is a jewel. It is a treasure. What is the importance of having an archive? Because you're talking about all these documents that were not published at the time, but now are being made available. So what is the importance of having an archive of documents and audiovisual materials available to the public?
I think it's critical. When you write something for publication, it carries one particular tone, one particular style. And when you write something to be spoken, it is very different. They're two distinct documents, two distinct styles. One is not better than the other. There's no kind of hierarchy here. But when something is spoken, there's a kind of power in it that can be lacking in something that's written strictly for reading. And that power, I tend to find very moving. There are things that I have read as I've been working with Justo's documents that have brought me to tears. They have been so moving, so amazing. His written work is amazing, but in a different way. We have to have access to these types of documents, I think. Another reason in general to have access to archives is because that's where we're going to have the best chance of finding what are called primary sources. Primary sources are those sources that were written at the time that you're studying about. So if you're studying about the Aztecs, you may want to look at some of the anthropological treatises that were written by the priests, the Spanish priests who were there, but at least it was written during the time. You have to learn how to read the documents. You can't just read them at face value. But they give you access to a particular place and time without the filter of another historian analyzing it for you. So it gives you access to those people. And you may read it differently. If I am of indigenous Mexican ancestry, if my ancestry was Mayan, for example, I might read a document that came out of the Mayan writings. The history was generally written by the Spaniards who were there conquering. So there's that filter you have to read through. But I might see something that somebody who was born and raised in New England from Scottish ancestry cannot see. So by having me read the document, the original document, I can see something that the historian who wrote my textbook might not be able to see. So I think the documents are critical. I think that in the case of the documents that we hold at the center, those are only primary sources if you're studying Justo's thought, the evolution of his thought. If you look at his earliest writings that we have to his most recent ones, you can see a transformation that has occurred over the decades. And he's been doing this for over 60 years. So you can see that transformation. You can see, frankly, that recently he's become much more pastoral in tone, in approach. He was just like every single one of us. He was a little bit more militant when he was younger. And you can see that. So the center's resources would be primary resources if you're studying that. But it's also an amazing source of information about church history because he gives lots of lectures and they're good. So it's a source for that, for information. They're called secondary sources. And so our materials can be used largely as secondary sources in the work that students are doing or in the sources that faculty members are choosing for their students to read.
And that's an amazing library.
Yeah.
And I know because I had the privilege of sorting through them and looking and reading and organizing them. And it is amazing the richness that you will find in those documents. So thank you so much for making them available to the public. In terms of the teachers, what should a teacher do if he or she is interested in using these resources in class, if they want to bring those wonderful documents, those wonderful articles, conferences, and etc., bring them into the classroom and incorporate them into what they teach? What should they do?
Right now, access to the database, which by the way, I just uploaded another 45 documents to it, so it's constantly growing. Right now, access to that database is restricted to people who are members of AETH, either institutional members or individual members. Mm-hmm. And once you're a member of AETH, you have automatic access to the database. And I think that would be the best route for an institution, for example, to have access to those documents so that their faculty members can see what is available and can decide if resource A would be appropriate for a class on early church history. So I think that's the best approach.
Well, thank you so much. So now we learned that to access those documents, you have to be an IF member and you can access them through the IF member portal. Mm-hmm. And you can even go directly to the page of the Justo Catherine González Resource Center and get access to the documents through that site as well. Well, Dr. González, this has been incredibly enlightening, a wonderful conversation. I always love talking to you outside of this realm, but it is clear to us that the history of Latin American Christianity and history in general is incredibly transforming, living, is a force. It's a force. If I can define it, it's a force. So I thank you so much, and I appreciate your commitment to this inclusive history, because you were saying you were a social historian. It means a lot to us, and it is the vital work that you're doing also with the center just demonstrates what is in your heart. So we thank you so much for your time and for sharing your perspective.
Thank you, Marta. It has been my pleasure. And I hope if anyone is interested in the center, they become AETH members and they get access to those resources. But thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you so much. And with this, we conclude our conversation today. Thank you.
Biblioteca Digital Pitts es un proyecto de Pitts Theology Library en colaboración con AEF. Puede contactarnos a través de la información que aparece en pantalla. Hasta pronto.